They say the devil doesn't need to hide in hell when he can wear a collar and speak Latin. March 19th, 1847, a day sacred to the Catholic faithful. A boy walks alone to dawn mass in rural Pennsylvania, white surplice gleaming in the frostbitten light, never to be seen again. Within 6 years, 14 more would vanish from that same stone chapel, leaving no blood, no screams, no trace, only silence and secrets. But here's what they didn't want you to find out. 3 weeks ago, buried beneath the old Sacred Heart Municipal Building, workers unearthed a lead-lined box, a coffin of knowledge. Inside, scorched photographs, forbidden correspondence, and testimony sealed under Vatican authority for over 170 years. These weren't the ramblings of madmen. These were records, witnesses, proof that what happened at St. Joseph's was not random, not isolated, and not the work of a lone predator. What we're about to reveal is not safe. It's not entertainment, it's initiation into a darkness older than this country and deeper than sin. So stay sharp, because this isn't just about 15 missing boys, it's about what they were taken for, and the machinery beneath the altar that fed on innocence, cloaked in ritual, protected by power, and sanctified by fear. They called him Father Cornelius Omali, but his real name was never found in any Dublin seminary. No records, no graduation, no ordination papers traced, just a man who appeared when they needed him most. October 1845, Sacred Heart was a patchwork of immigrant desperation, coal dust in the lungs. Irish names cursed by Protestant foremen, faith was the last thing they had. And when the old priest dropped dead suddenly in his garden, Father Omali rode in like an answered prayer, silver hair, piercing eyes. And that voice, measured, melodic, commanding, he wasn't just a priest, he was a presence, the kind of man who didn't ask for trust. He absorbed it. Within weeks, he had transformed the parish. The sermons were electrifying. The Latin flawless, the rituals precise. He introduced a formal altar boy program, structured, sacred, secret. Boys were invited, selected, to train privately in holy mysteries within the locked confines of the church's basement. Parents thanked him, mothers wept with gratitude. They didn't see the pattern forming, but someone did. A cleaner, Margaret O'Brien. She saw things in the basement Father McKenna never used. Burnt wax in strange patterns, cold ash that smelled of iron, and something darker in Father Omali's eyes when no one was watching. Michael Flanigan was the first, 12 years old, a baker's son with soft hands and a heart that still believed priests were closest to God. On the morning of March 19th, 1847, the feast of St. Joseph, he walked alone to serve dawn mass. He never came home. By sundown, the village was panicked. Men left their fields. Women abandoned their kitchens. They searched the woods, the stream, the old mineshafts. Nothing. Father Omali returned from Pittsburgh just before dark, his horse soaked in sweat, his expression somber but controlled. He gathered the community inside the candlelit chapel and gave them a reason. Michael, he claimed, had confessed to a grave sin, mocking the Eucharist and sharing communion wine with Protestant boys. His punishment, an all-night vigil of prayer. Omali said he left the boy in the chapel that morning and believed Michael had fled in shame. The congregation wept, not for Michael, but for the soul they believed had strayed. They swallowed Omali's story, because believing their priest was a liar meant tearing down the only sacred thing left in their shattered world. But Margaret found Michael's prayer book behind the altar, blood on the leather, burn marks on the stone, and the basement door, left open. They buried Michael without a body, without proof, without truth. Father Omali led the memorial with a trembling voice and a tear rolling down his cheek. He spoke of redemption, of fallen angels, of battles waged for young souls in unseen realms. He made the boy's disappearance part of a divine narrative, a test, a mystery of faith. The congregation clung to it like a drowning man to driftwood. But Margaret O'Brien wasn't satisfied. The smells in that basement didn't match incense. The patterns left in melted wax resembled more than candlelight. She began writing everything down: dates, names, rituals, inconsistencies. keeping her journal hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the choir loft. And then something stranger began. The altar boys changed. Tommy Sullivan, once playful and loud, began reciting scripture in Latin he had never learned. Patrick Donnelly announced he would become a priest, though he'd once sworn off church forever. Their voices dropped, their eyes dimmed, their innocence muted. They were still boys, but hollowed. Omali claimed it was spiritual growth, but Margaret remembered their silence, the way they avoided eye contact, the bruises hidden under sleeves, the way they flinched when he placed his hand on their shoulders. The next feast of St. Joseph was only months away, and the bell tower would ring again. March 19th, 1848. Exactly 1 year to the day after Michael vanished, the bells of St. Joseph's rang for the feast once again. The faithful gathered, the boys dressed in white, and Tommy Sullivan, bright-eyed, sharp-tongued Tommy, never came home. The story this time was different. Father Omali told the congregation that Tommy had volunteered for an ancient vigil, a rite practiced only in the oldest branches of the early church, a solitary spiritual test for the most advanced altar boys, those closest to sainthood. He claimed Tommy had entered a period of sacred silence, that he had left to walk the hills and pray alone, as monks once did in the deserts of Judea. But when Kathleen Sullivan demanded details, when a mother demanded to know where her son had gone, Omali's face changed. The mask slipped, only for a second, his answer vague, cold. Some paths to holiness, he said, cannot be explained to those who haven't walked them. He discouraged further questions. Margaret, watching from the rear pew, saw something the others didn't, a bruise on Omali's wrist, the shape of small fingers clenched in desperation. Another boy gone, another lie sanctified by ritual, another stone laid on a foundation built not of faith, but fear, and something beneath that church was growing. By 1849, St. Joseph's wasn't just a church, it was a fortress of silence. 3 altar boys gone, always on March 19th, always explained away as spiritual crises or divine callings. No bodies, no funerals, just whispers. The altar boy program expanded, more structure, more secrecy. Now boys were assigned individual sessions, never together, never speaking about their training. Parents were told it was necessary, that the boys were undergoing advanced instruction to shield them from corruption in the outside world, and the parents obeyed, not because they were fools, but because they were faithful. Omali had woven their fears into doctrine, their trust into chains. The church basement, once locked and forgotten, became sacred ground, off limits to all but Omali and the boys. The renovations were explained as preparations for relics and meditation, but Margaret noticed the supplies being carried in weren't for prayer. Tools, lime, chains. Then came the dreams. Several boys woke screaming about voices in the stone, about fire without smoke, about a man in robes with no face. Danny Murphy scratched crosses into his bed frame and whispered of tunnels beneath the church, where secrets slept in candlelight and shadows, asked questions only silence could answer. By now, 7 boys had vanished, but Omali's power had only deepened. Secrets thrive where trust is weaponized. Father Omali preached of sin like it was a disease only he could cure. His sermons turned apocalyptic, obsessing over purity, obedience, and spiritual warfare. He warned the congregation that forces beyond flesh were targeting the children, that only through rigorous, sacred discipline could their sons be protected. He never said what from, but he made it clear. Questioning him meant questioning the will of God, and so the mothers stayed silent, even as their sons grew hollow-eyed and distant. The fathers, exhausted by mines and mills, trusted the church as their fathers had before them. Only Kathleen Murphy resisted. Her son Danny had become a shadow. His laugh was gone. His appetite vanished. He spoke now in riddles and riddles inside riddles, Latin phrases that made no theological sense, words like lux tenebris, light of darkness. She confronted Omali after Mass, her hands shaking, her voice cracking with rage and dread. He did not raise his voice, he did not threaten, he simply said, "The boy's soul is not yours anymore." That night, Danny carved a phrase into his bedroom wall with a piece of iron he'd hidden under his pillow. The door opens below, we are not alone, and Kathleen stopped sleeping. By 1850, the village had learned to live with absence. The names of the missing boys were whispered in kitchens, never in church. Omali had trained them well, obedience wrapped in scripture, guilt disguised as holiness. And then came Patrick Donnelly. At 13, he was the strongest of them, the blacksmith's son, sharp mind, fierce will. He had once spoken of priesthood with passion, idolizing Omali like a prophet. But something changed. He began missing sessions, making excuses. Then, one evening, he simply ran into the woods behind Mill Creek, barefoot, screaming in Latin. They found him 2 days later in a hunter's shack, curled in a corner, arms covered in lash marks. He wouldn't speak at first, wouldn't eat, just muttered one phrase again and again: "He wears the blood of saints." When his father demanded to see the priest, Omali welcomed him into the sacristy and locked the door behind them. What was said in that hour remains unknown, but the next day, Patrick and his family were gone. Disappeared, no wagon tracks, no neighbors saw them leave. Only Margaret found what Patrick had left behind. Scratched into the wood beneath the church pew where he once sat, he walks between the walls. He cannot die. The disappearances weren't isolated. They were timed, calculated, ritualized. Each boy vanished near the equinox or feast day, always after a private session in the basement, always preceded by signs: the silence, the weight loss, the tremors, the dreams. By the spring of 1851, 9 altar boys were gone, but the community said nothing, because now it wasn't just fear, it was indoctrination. Father Omali began holding closed meetings with the parents of altar boys. He spoke of sacred covenants, of ancient tests. He used words that didn't come from scripture, words like transmutation, obedient vessels, and sacrificial elevation. He told them their sons were being prepared for something bigger than this life. That suffering was purification, that silence was devotion. Some parents wept with joy, believing their sons had been chosen for sainthood. Others just wept, and when Margaret tried to warn them, tried to read from her journal, they turned on her. Called her bitter, jealous, a lonely woman desperate for attention. But she had one ally, Bishop Kendrick of Philadelphia. She wrote him a desperate letter, enclosing copies of her notes, warning him of what was happening in Westmoreland County. 3 weeks later, a messenger from the diocese arrived, and Margaret O'Brien was never seen again. The official story: Margaret O'Brien returned to Ireland due to mental instability. Her home was sold within the week. Her journal gone, her belongings scattered, but the truth, her final entry, recovered years later from a hidden drawer in the sacristy's filing cabinet, said this: "They know. The bishop's seal was broken. He's not coming to stop it. He's coming to expand it." And then the pen trails off mid-sentence, because Bishop Kendrick didn't shut down St. Joseph's. He praised it. He visited in person, held mass, met with parents, blessed the basement. 3 more boys disappeared in the weeks that followed. And then the fire, September 14th, 1853, a blaze consumed the rectory archives, not the building, not the vestments, not the relics, just the records. Every baptism, death, confirmation, confession, gone. Except for one box, lead, lined, hidden beneath the foundation of what would later become the Sacred Heart Municipal Building. Inside were 127 handwritten pages, photographs, letters with wax seals, and warnings of excommunication for disclosure. Testimonies from altar boys who escaped before they were silenced, documents that proved the boys weren't runaways, they were offerings, systematic, sanctioned, sacramental, and every ritual had a blueprint. What those documents revealed wasn't random evil. It was structure, precision, doctrine. Each ritual followed an exact pattern. Dates aligned with the liturgical calendar, and something older, pre-Christian, pre-Roman, names appeared in the margins. Not just priests, but benefactors, wealthy families, landowners, names traced to high offices in Pennsylvania's early government, buried behind titles like trustee, donor, and ecclesial consultant. They weren't just taking boys. They were building something, a ritual infrastructure. St. Joseph's Church was a cathedral above ground, but below, vaulted stone chambers, symbols, guard pillars, and altars unrecognizable to any Catholic liturgy. The testimonies described basins of red glass, iron rings set into the floor, and murals, painted in a pigment that flaked like dried blood, depicting saints with hollow eyes and mouths sealed shut. The boys were brought there under the guise of sacred obedience, told they were chosen. Promised visions, fed substances mixed into communion. Why? Herbs, roots, chemicals not native to Pennsylvania soil. They were stripped, washed, and blindfolded. Then the chanting began, voices not just from the priests, but from behind the walls. From below the floor, one boy wrote, "They call it the rite of hollowing. You don't die, you just come back empty. By now you feel it." This was never just about lost boys. It was about transformation, not of the body but of the soul. The documents described the rite of hollowing as the first in a sequence of 3 sacraments not found in any Bible. Rituals intended to unbind a child's consciousness from divine protection, to render them spiritually porous. In simpler terms, it made them open to influence, to possession, to implantation. One surviving altar boy, his name redacted in Latin script, wrote this: "After the rite, I could feel my breath echoing, like something else was inside, breathing with me. I wasn't alone, not anymore." He described visions, not dreams, visions of beings draped in decayed robes, faces veiled, fingers too long, too still, entities that only appeared in candle light, never daylight. They spoke no words, but impressions were forced into the boys' minds. Commands, symbols, silence. Another page detailed a final blessing, where Father Omali, naked but wearing a mask carved from bone, poured a black, shimmering liquid over the child's forehead and whispered, "You belong to the church beneath the church." That phrase appears 17 times in the box's contents. The church beneath the church. And if you're still watching, type it in the comments, twice, lock it in, prove you're ready for what comes next. The church beneath the church. That's what they called it, not metaphor, not myth, an actual structure, hidden, older than St. Joseph's itself. According to one decoded map found among the sealed correspondences, the foundation of the church was laid over a site known to local Lenape tribes as Mtahui Tupan, roughly translated, the mouth that swallowed voices. A place they refused to approach after sunset, a place where sound vanished, where children once disappeared long before Catholics ever arrived. Omali didn't build over it by accident. He was placed there. Assigned, chosen, the diocese had known. Bishop Kendrick's private letters, written in cipher but cracked by historians decades later, speak of preserving the line, refining the method, and harvesting the innocence whose purity thins the veil. It wasn't just one church. There were others, a network across rural Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, each positioned on thin places, each with a priest fluent not only in Latin, but in something older, forgotten tongues found only in marginalia, apocryphal scrolls, banned monasteries. One boy, age 9, drew a map from memory of tunnels beneath the altar, branching like roots toward other cells, and in the center, circled in red, where he waits. Who he was, they never said, but they all feared him, where he waits. That phrase appears over a dozen times across the testimonies, always written in different hands, always with the same chilling precision, as if dictated, not imagined. Some of the altar boys called him the Pale Minister. Others referred to him only as the presence, no eyes, no voice, only pressure, like the weight of centuries pushing down through the stone. One account from a surviving boy, his name burned from the page, described a chamber so deep beneath the church that the air moved like it was alive. The walls were marked with spirals, not carved but grown, like veins feeding inward. In the center stood a stone table, and on it an empty robe. Every week, a different boy was made to lie on that slab, surrounded by priests singing in reverse Latin. Not praying, summoning, he wrote. You can feel him around the edges of your thoughts, cold, delighted, waiting to step in. They say he chooses who survives, but I don't think he ever leaves. And then he drew a symbol. A twisted cross fused with a broken eye. It was found burned into the underside of the chapel altar at St. Joseph's. When unearthed years later, it was still warm. By the feast of St. Joseph in 1853, 15 boys had vanished. And yet, no public outcry, no investigation, no arrests, only silence, because the silence was engineered. Parents were promised visions, promised that their sons would return as spiritual warriors. The Altar Boy program was rebranded as the Sons of the Sacred Light, a title pulled not from any known Catholic doctrine, but from a banned 13th-century monastic order condemned by the Vatican for esoteric corruption and necrosophic rites. Yes, necrosophic. The wisdom of the dead. Omali didn't invent these rituals, he inherited them. One photograph, recovered from the lead-lined box, shows a black mass in progress, not satanic, but something older. A boy lies motionless on a slab. Omali stands above him. Behind him are 3 other priests, faces hidden, robes stitched with symbols not seen since the fall of Carthage. That photograph was dated March 19, 1853, the final disappearance. And then he vanished, no trace of Father Cornelius Omali, no resignation, no body, just one note folded inside the church's hymn book. The 15th was the gate, the harvest complete, the vessel is sealed, and behind the altar, freshly laid stone. Warm to the touch, still breathing. After Omali vanished, the diocese sent a new priest, a young, soft-spoken man named Father Louis Grantham. He was different, unassuming, gentle in tone, but when he arrived, he brought no luggage. Only a sealed iron box. He was given no choice in his assignment, no explanation. His orders came directly from the office of Bishop Kendrick, who, according to buried correspondence, had just returned from a pilgrimage to 3 other vanished parishes across the Midwest. All sites of disappearances, all buried beneath new foundations. Grantham's first act, close the church basement permanently. His second, seal off the bell tower. He claimed it was due to structural instability. But the truth. He heard it. On his 3rd night in the rectory, Grantham recorded in his private journal, the bells rang at midnight, no wind, no ropes, just 3 tolls, and then whispering from beneath, asking questions I don't understand in a voice that isn't one. He asked the diocese for permission to leave. They refused. He asked again. They sent men in black coats, not priests. Government, church, something in between. They reminded him, your vow was for life, and life is fluid here. Within 2 weeks, Grantham stopped writing. But the bell tolled again. When the bell tolled a second time, March 19, 1854, it echoed across Sacred Heart like a wound splitting open. 3 times, no wind, no hands on the rope, just like before, except this time, no altar boys were missing. Because there were no altar boys left. After Omali's disappearance, the program was quietly dissolved. The parents who remained spoke of a collective penance. They believed the disappearances were divine punishment for their own failure to obey without question, but the truth was worse. Father Grantham was still performing rituals, alone. Witnesses, those few brave enough to speak, reported seeing flickering candlelight through the stained glass windows at midnight. Dark shapes moving behind the altar, strange markings burned into the grass behind the rectory each solstice. Even the local animals began to vanish. Cats, dogs, deer, something had to be fed. Grantham's final journal entry, dated exactly 1 year after Omali's last recorded mass, reads, "It's not about the boys. It never was. They were the key. The door is open now, and something ancient, something starved, is learning our names." That night, the bell rang 13 times, and every candle in St. Joseph's went out at once. After that final toll, the town of Sacred Heart began to dissolve, not suddenly but surgically. Families moved away without notice. Homes stood abandoned. Fields were left to rot. By 1856, only 9 families remained. By 1858, 2, then none, but the church still stood, untouched by rot, flame, or storm. Locals who passed through Westmoreland County spoke of strange music drifting from its bell tower. Not hymns, not organs, something older, hollow reeds and bone flutes, playing patterns that made livestock panic and compasses spin, and yet the diocese refused to demolish it. They claimed it was under spiritual protection. Others said legal battle. But hidden records tell a different story. Multiple demolition crews hired, none returned. One team's wagon was found 20 miles away, overturned in a field, the horses disemboweled. No human remains. By 1862, the land was quietly sold to a private trust, the Lazarus Foundation. Its board members were anonymous, their paperwork traced through shell entities stretching from Pittsburgh to Rome. And then the church was sealed, steel doors, lead plates, arcane sigils etched into the stone. Not to preserve it, to contain it, because beneath St. Joseph's the air still breathed and the walls still listened. For over a century, St. Joseph stood in silence, a wound in the earth, sutured with holy lies. But silence doesn't mean stillness. In 1971, the church was sold again, this time to the local municipality, under the guise of historical preservation. It was renamed the Sacred Heart Municipal Building. Paperwork was shuffled, funding quietly approved, and in 1973, renovations began. That's when the nightmares returned. Workers reported disorientation, nosebleeds, auditory hallucinations, chanting, crying, bells ringing underground. One man, a Vietnam veteran named Ellis Drew, quit after claiming he'd seen a child in priest's robes staring at him from the old confessional. Eyes black as coal, mouth stitched shut. On the 3rd week, they cracked into the sub-basement. And that's when they found the box, lead, lined, bolted to the foundation, sealed with wax and marked with the same twisted cross carved under the old altar. Inside, 127 handwritten pages, 5 sealed letters, 3 photographs, and a single brass key labeled only ad liminem to the threshold. The documents were immediately confiscated by state officials, but one copy survived, smuggled by a janitor who died 6 months later under unclear medical circumstances. His wife said he died whispering the same phrase over and over, "He's beneath us, still hungry." Here is what the documents finally reveal. The disappearances at St. Joseph's were not aberrations. They were initiations. 15 boys, sacrificed not to Satan but to something older, something hungrier, not evil in the way you've been taught, but primordial, a consciousness without flesh, a god before gods, worshipped by ancient sects that predate the Vatican by centuries. Their belief that divinity is not light or love, but hunger, order through fear, control through hollowing. They believed the soul is a lock, and innocence is the key. The altar boys weren't murdered. They were emptied, their essence offered drop by drop to awaken the presence beneath the earth, a force that sleeps under thin places, a veins in the planet where reality bends. St. Joseph's was one such place. So was Sacred Heart, so were others. The rite of hollowing was never stopped. It spread, hidden in plain sight beneath orphanages, seminaries, rural chapels, each feeding the same ancient system. The church beneath the church is still alive. And now, you know, you heard the whispers, you saw the signs. If you've made it this far, you're no longer a bystander, you've been marked. And if tonight you dream of bells tolling without sound, don't answer. It means the gate remembers your name.